But it's always a pleasure to come to Bielefeld because 10 years ago, in parallel with CITEC starting, we worked together with Helge, Gerhard, Britta, Katarina, and many others on our first joint project called iTalk, one of the FP7 projects. And since then, we had a Marie Curie together. So I feel this is really my home in the sense. It's always a pleasure to come. Sorry I could only do the half a day, but this is part of the traveling requirements. But happy to be here. I understand we have 1.5 hour in total. I will try to do 1 hour talk. There will be a small exercise for you towards the beginning, just to wake you up after lunch and the break. And then we do 20 minutes of the time left for discussion. So the title, for those who have seen my talk, the first part might sound familiar, but the second part is totally new. Also, the first part focuses on language, which is really my main area of research. Language, we mean here embodied language learning in robots. You will see examples. But then there is a new component of my research direction, which is trust and theory of mind, and you will see how the two can be linked together. Also, you can compare different approaches to cognitive architectures. In the language one, we use a connectionist or neuro-robotics type of approach. In the second one, we use a very different approach, which is Bayesian modeling, of course linked to the neuro-robotics one. But let's start, before we go into the technical presentation of some models, I would like to start from a practical and theoretical aspect of designing social interaction with robots, and because I tend to do language, most of my social interaction will refer, at least in the first part of the talk, to language speaking, spoken conversation with robots. We have ongoing work on nonverbal communication using gestures, but you will see later it's also about trust. Once you can talk to a robot, you can have conversations. How can a person trust the robot? And also, how can a robot have a theory of mind of the person to know what to do? And you will see examples towards the end of my presentation. So if we focus on the language component first, we know it's relatively easy. You know, we all have our digital assistants, Siri, Google, Alexa, and so on. So easy in the sense that it's now commercial product that we can use almost every day. I know people who actually use it. Some of us, I don't really bother to do it, but they are there. But what's the issue with systems which are there? The issue with existing systems like Siri and others is that they can be pre-programmed. You can embed a dictionary, semantics, whatever you want from an NLP point of view, but there is lack of real embodied meaning. Siri can tell you where to go. Siri can tell you about preparing a coffee, but Siri doesn't share an understanding with you of what it actually means to make a cup of coffee. At least this is what I try to demonstrate. Let me clarify. I'm not saying here that we want our robots to be aware of their own self-understanding of meanings. This is still almost like a Skinnerian approach to behavioral approaches that link meanings, actions, and language. So this is possible. For those of you who did history of artificial intelligence, 50 years ago, this was also possible. ELIZA, I think we should be celebrating the 50th anniversary. ELIZA was the first text-based chatbot which implemented a psychotherapist talking to humans. So this was possible, I would say, of course, very simplified versions at the time. So this is possible and easy, but let's go into the mind on these machines, or these Siri, ELIZA systems, to see what's the representation of meaning. The representation of meaning, of course, is a series of symbols called meanings. So if I go into an ELIZA type or Siri type system, they will share some kind of dictionary definition. So if I ask what's the definition, what's the meaning of push, they won't have any problem in answering the question because they will look at their own database, their own dictionary, and they will say, for example, push is defined in my dictionary, this is the example from the Webster's American English Dictionary, is defined in this very abstract sense, which is to press forcefully against to move. A very generic meaning, which the system is expressing through words. Okay, I ask you a definition of a word, you tell me more words. But let's challenge these systems further by asking them to define the words using their definition. And here, force, in the same dictionary, is defined as energy or strength. Fair enough, good progress. We kind of convinced that you know what you say because you can explain to me the meaning of each word, right? But let's further challenge the systems. Force is defined as energy or strength, but you see that energy is actually defined as strength or force. So energy defines force, and now force defines energy. And you see we start to have a problem. If I'm a robot who has to connect my force sensors, my energy levels, to my words, I need a human experimenter who takes my sensors and my words and makes a one-to-one linking. So I need a human interpreter. Sivan Harnad calls this a symbol grounding problem. We want here a system, a robot, which actually develops and learns its own intrinsic link and understanding of the meaning between these two. So we don't want a system to fully depend on this type of, they are called merry-go-round. This is the park game with children where you go back to the same point. We want to ground, to have some ground, to have the fit of the system based at least in some of our sensory motor experience, meaning our sensor states, our battery level states, and then, of course, emotional states if you have emotions and so on. So how do we do this? Before we look at how we do this, I want to demonstrate that even by just doing this, you can have systems which give you the impression that they understand. So Siri, or a robot which uses, sorry if I advertise Siri, Alexa, just to use some examples. This system can convince us that they understand. And for those familiar with the philosophy of artificial intelligence and cognitive science, there is a famous philosopher, Searle, who proposed the Chinese thought experiment. How many of you know the Chinese room experiment? Raise your hand for me to give an idea. So not half of you, which is good, at least the other half will learn something new today. And to explain this, thought experiment, this hypothetical experiment, I'm going to use a documentary of an American scientist and journalist, David Eagleman, who actually came to Plymouth to do some filming of the robot and to link the symbol grounding problem, the Chinese room experiments, with our iCub experiments. I will present my own iCub experiments with my own videos, but I'm going to use from the same documentary called The Brain. This was shown in Channel 4 or BBC 4, I don't remember, in the UK about a year ago. I don't know if you saw this in Germany. Sorry, actually, not many of you are Germans probably. So wherever you were, this started as a PBS, American Public Television documentary. Episode 6 talks about future of the brain and implementation in robots. So let's ask David to tell us what's the Chinese room experiment. What are the implications?
In the 1980s, the philosopher John Searle was chewing on this problem, and he came up with a thought experiment that gets right at the heart of it. And he called this the Chinese room.
The experiment goes like this. I'm locked in a room. Outside, there's someone who only communicates in Chinese. She writes out some questions and then posts those to me in the room.
Now, I don't speak Chinese, but I do have these books, and they give me instructions on exactly what to do with these symbols. So I look in the book, and if I can find a match to the symbols, then the book tells me exactly how to respond. So I can look up this response. That matches, so now I can post this as the reply to the message I received.
When our Chinese speaker receives the message, it makes perfect sense to her.
您最喜欢哪一本书？哪里是中国的首都？你梦里梦到什么？
As far as she's concerned, we're having a conversation in her language.
Just by following a set of instructions, I can convince somebody on the outside that I speak Chinese.
Okay, so that's the whole point. I can convince somebody outside which I speak Chinese. So if I'm a robot, I can convince my user that I understand exactly what the user is saying, what the user is asking, because I give the correct answers. But I think we all agree here, in this implementation of the Chinese room experiment, that David Eagleman, assuming he doesn't speak Chinese, he has no clue of what questions is being given, what answer is given. But he is giving the right answers to the right questions in a language he doesn't know at all. So what I like to do when I have slightly longer talks, like in summer school, is to wake the students up at the beginning by giving them an exercise. So we are going to do the Chinese room experiments, and I'm going to demonstrate to you that you, most of you, not all of you, you in 5 minutes will be able to give me answers to my questions in Chinese. This is a Chinese I use Google Translate to go from one language to the other, so I'm a proper Chinese experimenter here, but I'd like you to try something simpler. We are used to Latin characters. Do we have any Asian, Chinese, Japanese people in the audience? Okay. Okay, so we will do, that's why maybe we don't do this in Chinese. So let's do this exercise. You are going to do this. David explained this in general lines. To be able to perform this experiment, you need two elements. You need definitions, a dictionary, so this word, picciota, and then it has a few definitions. And then you need a reply rule book. This is essential. If you get a question, if you get strange characters, Latin characters, Chinese characters, it doesn't matter. If you get something in input as a question, you want to give an answer which makes sense. So this is enough for you, for me, and for David in the Chinese room to do this. He was doing it with the book, right? We'll do this here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to divide you. We said you have to wake up a bit. So if there are pairs of you, or triplets, just working 2 or 3. If you are sitting alone, you have to work alone, or you get closer to the others. So I think it's best to work at least in pairs. Choose, doesn't matter what the beginning of your surname is, A to L. Half of you, please try to choose, it's a self-emergency, so I'm sure half of you will choose the first question, quanti anni avevi la picciotta? And then the other group will choose, will get another question, so vuole mangiare la ardina. And I need an answer from you. This is the rule book. You see there are some slots for variables. I don't want to make it too easy, so you have to guess that if there is an X there, the X should go there. You need to find some kind of matching. It's a picture matching exercise. I think it's easier to do with Latin characters than to do this. This is a real language. Almost language. So if you know it, please pretend you don't know it. Don't help your peers, okay? And then I will tell you later, not only what's the language, what's the word. So let's try to do this 5 minutes. So you work in groups, and you use some pen and paper. Please, I need half the groups to give me an answer to this question, a meaningful answer which makes sense to me. I know this language, so I can check, okay? So please start. You can chat. And I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to raise your hand if you have found the solution. So helping you a bit, visual mapping, this looks very similar to this, right? So I must be working there. There is an X, which is this word, so I must be looking maybe there, right? So you have to do the matching between this. The second group will get probably the last one, right? So linking similarities. Has any group already solved the problem? Don't give me the answer, just raise your hand if you think you have an answer. Very good. One group. Another group. Very good. Oh, you are faster than other students. Oh, very clever. Of course, we are at CITEC here, so I expect this higher level of performance. So for those, how many of those raised their hand? How many of you who have finished have answered the first, did the first one first? So you did the second? Very good. So would you like to tell me, I think for the others we'll stop just because we have lots of slides to go through later. Would you like to say the answer to quanti anni avevi la picciotta? La picciotta avevi 7 anni. Who else did the same question? Was your answer different? You agree? Why do you agree? Any other group who did the same? I would like to hear some other different answer, please, if there is any. You are too clever. So the answer is correct. Second group, you did the second question, right? What's the answer to "Socco vuole mangiare la ardina"? Please say it aloud. La ardina vuole mangiare Simenza, very good. Any other answer? Any other answer? No? Okay, so let's look at the correct answer. Oh, I don't have them. Maybe I should try to move around, I don't know. The video recording person will hate me, but let's try this. So there it is. These are, in other groups I do the full set of questions. It's easier just to do 2 for the moment. These are the answers. So, quanti anni avevi la picciotta? La picciotta aveva 7 anni, so well done. And then, so mangiare la Dina vuole mangiare si mensa, so very good. Okay, so you gave the correct answer in few minutes. It's not Chinese, but we call this not the Chinese room experiment, we call it the Sicilian room experiment. I'm Sicilian, so in Italy we have Italian, in school we learn Italian, but in certain regions we have a strong dialect. So I'm Sicilian, Michele is from Milan, they don't have a real dialect. Something, we have a proper dialect. So if I speak to my parents, maybe Michele will understand, I don't know, 30%. You can get a word once in a while. So it's a dialect, that's why it's not really a language. But there are linguists here, so you can help me defend or not this statement. But the whole point of this, we need to give meanings. How do we give meanings to this? How can we go out of this Chinese room or Sicilian room to start to get common meanings? Okay, when you ask the question, you get an answer also because of the meaning. So one way to do this is, let's pretend you are babies. You are born in Sicily, you hear the word picciotta when you see something like this. So what do you think is the meaning of picciotta? So somebody said girl, is there any other possible meaning for picciotta?
Dress.
Dress, very good. So we are entering here another issue in cognitive science, which is the Kawagae problem. So you don't know if the sound that you hear refers to the whole part, a girl, or to a part, which is the dress, right? But there are 2 possible hypotheses. Zanzina, for any American here, Aunt Jemima maple syrup, right? So it's zia, aunt. Actually, my Zanzina, zia Vincenza. So Hadina is chicken. This is egg, easy. This is simenza, seeds, pumpkin seeds, food for animal, for birds, for example. Manchari, actually Manchari, I should have run the... Did you see Mr. Bean doing things? Because I want to show conceptually what's the implication of this Manchari. I lost the mouse, there it is. Let's see if the video is... So for Manchari, we needed a video. So Manchari didn't mean Mr. Bean, right? The fact that I need to show you a video, it means that probably it's a... What kind of word is it? It's a verb, we call it verb. It's an action, right? It's an action word. And what's the action word here? Eating, very good. So in some cases we just need to look at things. In other cases we need to see an event. But I like this challenge here. What's the meaning of assai, which is not obvious? But I made a choice of showing you something in common. Also, you can contrast one with the other. So what's assai? A lot, very good. Of course, the other one is few or little, right? Again, how did I show you this? So perceptually, there isn't really much in common. Here, if you have to count the number of things, this is relevant to what I'm going to present later on teaching robot about numbers. Okay? This isn't really numbers, it's more fuzzy quantifiers, let's call them. But what this is to say that learning the basic words of a language implies, at least at the beginning, perceptual experience. You are sitting there, you are not doing anything, and you are still learning a few real meanings. If you were Sicilian babies, you would probably be moving with your body and play and so on. You will see examples in a moment. In some cases, you need to also compare and contrast and so on to discover the meaning of language. So why is this relevant? This is relevant because we want to build social robots who are able to communicate and interact with people, have a common understanding of words. So if I ask my robot, in my robot home, please make me a cup of tea, or please bring me my medicines, my sleeping pills or whatever, I want the robot to actually do it. I don't want the robot to, like Siri, Alexa, talk to me. I want Alexa with legs or wheels, whatever, and do it. So common understanding. How do we do this? The approach we use, we call it bio-inspired, but in particular, we look at developmental aspects of development and learning. That's why we call our field developmental robotics, which comes from developmental child psychology. So how do we do this? Here I summarize some of the main principles. If there are psychologists here that might even start to argue with me, oh, this sentence is not really true. So let's assume this is a relatively stable description in which the majority agrees of events for language development in children. First, children are not born with the language and they are very slow. It takes 1.5 years, 18 months for a child to know 10 words. Fortunately, around the end of the second year, so when you are 24 months old or something, you start something called vocabulary spurt, where you add any words with something called also fast mapping. I hear a word, I see the object, I see the actions, and I learn it. Up to the first 18 months, it takes repeated presentations over many days with feedback. Another experiment, children with 18 to 24-month-old babies, they don't go to school to learn language, right? Even if they go to nursery school, it's to play, to socialize. They might do some schooling, but in reality, learning to speak, to understand meanings, is a continuous active engagement. And you will see the example in a study by Smith and Samuelson. We know our brain is vision brain, speech brain, and so on. We know it's modular, but we also know, studies from Friedman Pulver-Müller, who is in Berlin now, that even when I perform linguistic tasks, my motor cortex, which has to do, let's say, with motor meanings, like hit, pick, kick, are active, and I can differentiate this. Also, you will see towards the end, because we are contextualized this communication between robots and people in a social context, I need to be able to trust my teacher, right? If I learn from my world, there are cases in which I don't trust the person who is teaching me. I must learn to distinguish. So there are demonstrations that theory of mind, the theory which I have of the mind of the other person, develops, changes, matures. And of course, you will see later examples of trust applied to language learning. So you can have two teachers, a good teacher, reliable, unreliable teacher. How does a robot know whom to trust? The same way in these child psychology studies, how does a child know which teacher to trust? This is what they study. So we are going to look at a series of these examples. Some of these citations will appear there because I described the study first, and then the psychology study, and then we look at the cognitive implementation and also the cognitive architecture. So we said the field is called Developmental Robotics, which is part of the wider cognitive robotics approach, if we can say this, which implies computer scientists, which is mostly me, my type of approach, AI, computer science people doing their programming algorithms, good people like IIT, Lisbon, those involved in the iCub project, for example, producing the hardware, the paper, and so on. Linguistic knowledge, and I think we could put real, maybe CITEC, it would almost match, wouldn't it? But the focus on development, sorry for the self-promotion here. Don't buy the book. Make sure that when you go back to your labs, check if they have the book in the main library and in the lab library. Okay, so I need 2 copies from each institution, please. I'm sure CITEC has tens. I will check afterwards. We have some Chinese speakers, at least one. The Japanese have to wait. It's apparently in press, but the Chinese version came a few years ago. This is my name in Japanese. It says Angelo Cangelosi, they told me. And so, if you like the idea of a Chinese room reading of my book, here is the version. Okay, so let's focus on 2 main parts: language learning, embodied, active language learning with your full body interaction, and the second part, the trust and social interaction with 2 different cognitive architectures. So I already mentioned we start with general agreements on phenomena in language learning, slow, vocabulary spurt, and so on. We map them into a 3-year-old stage of growth of artificial cognitive systems, let's say a robot, an iCub, a Pepper, a Baxter. And then we try, these are the main references, or some of the main ones, and we try to study this in robots. We want to grow a baby robot in its home environment or home kindergarten to develop these skills. Up to 3 years of age, number knowledge, syntax knowledge, in the middle, single word, few words, combinations, vocabulary spurt, you see the increase in performance. The first year, no real language, it's all babbling of sound. So if I'm in Sicily, I learn to pronounce my Sicilian sounds. If I'm in China, I learn to pronounce my Chinese sounds. And then we take some of these studies, we look at the experimental setup because we want to make sure that we can exploit the richness of an experimental approach in psychology, child psychology, in our robotics approach. So here, you are going to see a mock experiment performed by Linda Smith and Samuelson in Indiana at the time. This shows the children can learn to name an object not only when the object is visible, but also when the object which is named is not visible at the same time. So the researcher shows two objects, and she uses on purpose the left and the right part of the space to locate systematically the two objects. The baby here, sitting on our side, the hands of the baby, which I understand are the hands of Linda Smith for the mock video. The baby is not passively with the eye tracker system, looking. It's engaging with its body to do this. So space and posture here are almost synonyms. And finally, she names the object when we don't see the object, when the child can't see the object. Of course, she respects the left-right dimension, and this is in the first experiment. And now she's going to ask the child to play again with the objects until the child can be tested to show me, once the objects are put in the middle, mixed together, where is the object? Where is the modi? Modi is this new word that they invented. Can you find me the modi? So this is the experiment, left, right, hide, say it, when the child is looking on the left side, our left side. We show, mix them, test. Results, 73%. Statistically speaking, means that at this age, 18 to 24-month babies can, the majority of them, learn to name objects which are not visible, and they do this, they think, because of their almost postural memory of the two sides or the two objects. The reason they say this is because they redo the experiment, they swap now the chances of each object appearing in the two sides 50-50, and the result disappears. They've done many of these experiments, so we must accept this is a good explanation. Again, good psychologists will always disagree with some aspects of the design, but overall, let's accept this agreement, and we want to use the same methodology for our baby robot. This is what we started to do in 2010 when iTalk, our joint project, was in the first year of age. So good, actually, I never realized. First year of age, 18 months, I think it was, similar to the project and the iCub. And here is a video, Tony Morse, my collaborator, teaching the robot two methods. Fast mapping, I mentioned this briefly before. I see the object, I hear the sound at the same time, and I learn the easy bit. Then later, he's going to show you the modi setup. You show the object, you hide it, make sure the robot pays attention posturally with its body to the same part of the space, and then name it and test it. So let's hear Tony Morse.
So this is the iCub robot, and today we're going to teach it the names of some objects. Here, a truck, a ball.
So the iCub is pre-programmed to look at things that move unless it knows the label, the name. You see Tony shakes the object to make sure the robot looks at the space before he names it, but he can see it, that's fast mapping. And now we are going to look at the modi setup. Of course, you want to check that the two objects are learned in parallel, not one overlapping the other one. So space, remember, it means postural space.
So when children learn the names of objects, those objects don't have to be in sight. It can be through association. So we'll show you how that works on the robot.
So iCub, this is the camera's vision, a bit of object tracking here, color processing, shape processing, you will see in a moment. This is motion saliency map. I want to see where movement happens, where white is pixel which change in intensity in color, means there is movement there. So look at the hand, the robot is looking at the same part where the piano was shown, and now I can say piano. And of course, our test is here. So in this setup, in this video, it's a natural physical interaction. We actually did the experiment with the table, the two objects, to make sure it was consistent. We created 20 artificial iCubs. where we changed the initial parameter set of their cognitive architecture to make sure this is done. Also because you can see in the next slide, we also compare the statistics in children experiments and in robot experiments. This is a summer school on cognitive architecture, so this is very important. Our architecture is called ERA, Epigenetic Robotics Architecture. Epigenetic robotics is almost a synonym of developmental robotics. So developmental robotics architecture uses neural networks. In this case, a set of coordinate maps, self-organizing maps, self-organizing maps for the body posture. So you allow the robot to do body bubbling, and you create a coordinate map. Apologies for those who are not familiar. It's a neural network that creates a categorization in a continuum of different positions in terms of posture. Same for color. Give examples of colors, and things which are yellow will be in the same region of the map, of the 2D map of these neural network units. Red will be maybe the opposite. Orange in between will be physically in this map in between. It's called topographic similarity. So we created this, we pre-wire the brain of the robot to do vision processing, postural motor processing. We use speech recognition. We don't use maps anymore for speech. And then, this is very important, the dotted connections are Hebbian associative learning neural network type associations, which are trained during the experiment. Coordinate maps, you pre-train the baby to have a brain ready to see colors, to see shapes, but you want to perform the language learning by really doing this during the experiment. So when you saw the video, the connections here were actually adapting. And the reason I'm calling this an architecture is because the same setup is being tested with some extensions and modifications to a set of experiments and phenomena in child development. So fast mapping, we saw it. Postural MODI setup, we saw it. I skipped this. And for example, another phenomenon in language learning is called mutual exclusivity. Mutual exclusivity means I take a child, I show 3 objects, I ask the mom, does the child know the name for the object, aeroplane? The mother fills in a questionnaire called CDI. Yes, it knows aeroplane. She knows aeroplane. She knows train. She doesn't know whistle, for example. Okay, this is the whistle object. So she prepares, cut it to May, the child psychologist who then came to Plymouth to collaborate. Jessica Horst is her supervisor. She's now in Lancaster in a big developmental group. They come, they do the experiment. There is no teaching here. The child learns the name of the 3rd object by mutual exclusivity principle. If I hear a new sound and I see a new object, by mutual exclusivity, they cannot be the names for the objects which I already know, so they must be the names for this. So let's look at the experiment. Can you point to the chim? So remember, we know she knows the other 2. So one go, not even need of teaching, you can do it. And in the video, we took the same architecture with some modifications. Sorry, tomato and frog are pre-trained. And now we are going to do the mutual exclusivity test. So we look at the robot gaze, and we assume this is the object. The hands and arms were at the time at IIT Genoa for the upgrade with the skin, so we use social gaze here for communication. So same architecture does this, and then in our field, an important concept is called cumulative landing. You don't want to run one experiment on mutual exclusivity, one experiment like we did up to now, one experiment on fast mapping, one experiment on MODI. We want to put them together to simulate the incremental development of the stage. Open-ended, development never ends. Cumulative, you accumulate knowledge. So in this video, which I'm going to comment, we will see examples of accumulation of knowledge over time with different strategies.
Hello. This is a box.
So this is, of course, fast mapping. I see, I hear, same time, I learn. The cognitive architecture is adjusting the connections of the Hebbian links. This is the testing. Now we do mutual exclusivity. You see, in the same experiment, we don't restart our neural network, our architecture. So where a test, the robot points, It knows this is box, new object, new sound, mutual exclusivity. This is the situation. Let's double check you haven't forgotten, of course, the previous word. Otherwise, you are not cumulating. This is the... Now, word order. I didn't show you examples here. Third year of age, 24 to 30 months, you start to combine small sentences, 2-3 words. Color, object or shape. Now we do generalization by shape, right? I know the shape, I know a similar shape, I generalize. Language is the power of generalization. You don't need to teach every single word. Generalization by color, using red cap as the initial pointers to the two words, to the meanings of the two words. Again, like red cap, two new concepts, the concept of green, the concept of leaf. And now you can even do mutual exclusivity by color. And you learn 2 words in one go. So purple, carton, 2 new words. I know this is green, it must be the other one. Carton must be the same, so I'm going to translate to attach carton to this. That's what I do the testing. And this goes on. So this shows, I hope convincingly, that you accumulate in the same system using all this child-inspired strategy. The behavior robot, which, this is... In Italian we say, in Naples they say, ogni scarafone è bella mamma tua. Means even the ugliest child will look beautiful to his or her parents. So this is my iCub. It's my beautiful iCub. Hopefully you will share the same emotions, attachment. So we show this. We are teaching actions. Actually, I didn't show the actions. Yes?
Sorry, for the previous experiment you showed, why didn't the iCub stop the associate red with cup? With the concept of, with the shape of the cup.
But at the beginning, you just repeat the 2, you don't know what's red. For the robot, you don't know what's red. The robot repeats the 2 words. You don't know what's red and what's... Exactly. It's afterwards where you look at the systematicity. There are all these... When you say red, when you show a red cup, there is a winner-take-all node in these corner maps, which is red. The other one is winner for the shape. You learn the associations. It's after you start to use all these ambiguations. Or inferences. Inferences as part of this neural architecture implementation. But very good question. So it's they discover like a child, you experiment. We mentioned the girl versus dress. How do you know? By looking at your interactions over time. And these networks use a recurrent, if you have 2 words, you need some kind of recurrency. So I didn't show the actions. I had to cut a few slides because I'm already late, in the sense I know I have many more things to show. So believe me, we also do actions. What we need to do is remember the assai picca, many, few, lots of seeds, lots of eggs, few seeds. So how do we teach this? Or if you want 1 egg, 2 eggs, 3 eggs. How do we do this? The answer is actually here. I don't know why I showed. So this is the question. How do children learn the abstract concept of a number? That's how you learn it. Not by going to school and I'm going to teach you the concept of 1. No, 1, it's a continuous pointing at 1, counting 1. Why do we do this? When you see a child, you do number games. This is because we know that part of the development requires this active engagement. So we have robots, we have arms, we have fingers. Why don't we do this? So in one experiment, this is again the result of a joint project with Bielefeld, Robodoc Marie Curie. One was the gestures. So there are experiments that show that if a child sits in front of objects being counted, or points at the objects, or even sees a puppet pointing at an object, or in a further stage the child touches the object being counted, you increase your performance. The more active you are, the higher is the number which you learn at the same stage of your, let's say, age of development. So I'm sorry if I go fast here. Each of these slides is really a paper. So if you have any interest, go and look at the paper. They are cited here, and I can send the links. But I can only give you, it's a summary overview slide. We can discuss this later. So an overview. One is on gesture. The other one is on counting. So here the iCub is trained, 3 iCubs. This is an iCub who has been trained to do 1, 2, 3, what we call finger counting. You have another iCub which is trained just to do in silence this. always in one sequence. Each culture might have its sequence, so we have a robot that does its sequence. Third type of robot, the robot bubbles numbers, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, no finger counting. This is the robot who has been trained to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you tell the robot 2 plus 2, the robot simply does what it knows it can do. 1, 2, and then if you say add 2, continue 2 more, it will do 3, 4, basically it will say 4. So the robot is giving us an answer, a Skinnerian, remember, almost a behaviorist answer to our number counting, because this is not addition, this is building up, cumulative building up of skills, which later develop metacognition skills like addition, subtraction, and so on. But I like this experiment for one extra reason, because I can look in the mind of the robot and see what's a number for this robot. We use, as usual, neural networks, including now a deep neural network version, recurrent network because you have a sequence. If I look at the way the numbers are arranged in the mind of the robot, in these artificial neural networks, for this finger and number sequence robot, you can see that 1 and 2 are very close to each other, 2 and 3 are close. This is called cluster analysis. The 5 means very dissimilar, 1 means low dissimilarity, which means high similarity. So branched low level here means very similar. So 1 is very similar to 2, 2 is even more similar to 3. 1 is very different from 10 because look what I need to do to reach 10. You go up to 5 level dissimilarity and then you go down, which is good. This is what numbers are. In addition, this robot, although it learned to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in its mind, 5, 8, and 6 are a bit muddled up, right? They are a bit confused, which is okay. We are modeling stages of development. But look at the brain of the robot who, in the second group, only does bubbling. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. If you do this, you have no clue. Your representations in your neurons have no representation of our concept of numerical values, ordinality, cardinality, and so on. The quantity, the order. Numbers don't make sense, or maybe they make sense from a perceptual sounds point of view, or the stages of your training. So now I love this result because it shows that the body forces you to create a representation of your concept which is meaningful from a number point of view. So although they are abstract concepts, one person, one pointer, one room, one planet, there is nothing in common, but of course we relate to these some communalities that will maybe start as a child from our body. So up to here, I think I've shown, this is the research in the last probably 6 years, of the approach that we say embodied language learning. When I was invited, I was asked to go beyond language, try to show what else can you do. Of course, you can speak to these robots, but what about other aspects of social learning? And one important aspect is trust. And trust is important not only for us from a cognitive, developmental point of view, but also from a technical point of view. Apparently, these autonomous cars are coming tomorrow. I think they are already doing it. They will come in 5 years' time. They will come in 10 years' time. We will find out. I like to show, did Giulio Sandini show you the slide? I asked him to send me the slide. There is an article in IEEE Spectrum, 1982, I think, with a picture of a newspaper saying autonomous cars will be in our streets in a few years' time. We show this, okay. So, whenever these cars come, whenever our iCub paper robot comes to solve all our problems, help our parents and so on, who are getting older, how can we trust? Assuming we have this autonomous car which really drives almost autonomously alone, how can I trust it? So this is important. Even if you have the power, you need to have the human is involved. So how can I trust my robot? You should also say, if you are a robot, how can I trust I use my master, I don't know, I couldn't think of another word, my human friend, companion. Okay. So 2 ways of the problem. Typically us, we buy a robot, we have an issue of trusting, but if you think the robot can, a fully autonomous robot must have its own capability of trusting or not trusting people. So how do we do this? We have done research in the last 2 years on a cognitive development approach to the trust development. So we always look at the stages of trust, but you will see in a moment also on theory of mind. To be able to trust, I have some slides to introduce this, I must be able to have a theory of the other person. So if I have two teachers, they are teaching me the names of this object. I know one person is unreliable. He keeps using different words from the same object. I know another person is more systematically reliable. I create a theory of the mind of the unreliable person, a theory of the mind of the other person, and then I use this to make my own learning, carry out my learning. So two coins of the problems, the robot's point of view and the human's point of view. We are going to look at both of them. I'm going to spend more time on the robot's trust of other agents, but there is at least a video at the end on the human side of it. We are doing lots of HRI experiments. This stays closer to my heart just because this is a real cognitive modeling approach. The other one is more a social experimental psychology, which is important, but a different interest. You will see in a moment, from a cognitive architecture point of view, we have a statistical Bayesian model of belief generation and some kind of learning, and then the HRI experiments on the social anthropomorphic factors affecting behavior, the trust in the human person. You will see examples in a moment. So remember we are doing developmental robotics, so we look at developmental psychology. What happens in development? In development we know from all studies that children develop a theory of mind over time. There is a famous setup which is called the Salian. There is a person here, you are the person, the protagonist they call it, hides an object in one of the two containers, the basket or the box. You are observing, the child is observing, the person goes away. You child are sitting here, you see these two characters. One hides the object and she goes away. Then the other person, when the first is away, moves the object. Then she asks the child, when the first protagonist comes back and asks the child, where is the object? A child which has a theory of mind of this agent is to predict that according to this agent, the object will be here. Of course, then if you have experienced something else. It's a standard setup in child psychology experiments. The results show that when are you able to notice, to know that there's been some cheating here? You detect the cheating, the deception. So for the 3-4-year-old babies, the children here, there is no clue to distinguish. In some way, which indicates there is no full theory of mind. Half of them, approximately 4 to 6, are able to detect that this person doesn't know that the other person moved the object, so they cannot distinguish the deception. Instead, when you are older, of course, the majority of children have a full theory of mind, and they know that the person, you know the object in a different place because you saw it, but you know the other person cannot know because she was away. So that's the standard, one of the standard tasks to model and study, I would say to study experimentally the development of trust in children and also theory of mind. Another study, Vanderbilt and others, more recent, they look at development of this trust. It's the same approach, but here you have the reliable teacher and the unreliable teacher. So if you have these two persons here, one will always cheat, the other one will always be genuinely locating the objects in the same location, and then it indicates to you the location. And if you do this, again, you see over time, when you get older, there is only at some point, children will prefer the advice always of the helper, or always meaning statistically speaking, they will prefer the helper, and they don't like the tricker, the unreliable person as much. Here, there is no statistical difference, so there is a tendency, but still no difference. At the beginning, of course, they just trust everybody. So similar to the previous setup, but you add here two teachers, helper, non-helpers, reliable, non-reliable. And then, because we are doing language learning, we found a nice study where Koenig and Harris did a study on preschool children who are taught to speak. So you have two teachers, they are taught the names of objects, and at the beginning, you try each of the two teachers reliably, unreliably assigns names to the objects. And then, of course, you want to know which one is the correct name of the object when you ask the child, depending on who the instructor was. Two instructors, reliable, non-reliable. To do this, you must have a theory of mind, remember, of this situation. So 3 experiments in psychology, child psychology. Today we are going to see a video of this experiment. We have done also studies on the Van den Witt experiment. Just to introduce our cognitive architecture, if you look at definitions of theory of mind, a key element is the belief. Okay, you have a belief that the other person thinks. Theory of mind implies that you know that the other person thinks that you think. It could be a recursive belief system. So beliefs are important, and this led to also look at another theory of mind in child psychology, which is called the theory. The child is a bit like a scientist. So the child observes, creates a theory, an expectation of the reliability of the two people. It looks for evidence. If you keep being reliable, you will be classified as reliable. If you change your mind, you will be classified as unreliable. You revise the theory, and this is what we do, almost as an explicit way. So we put together now for our cognitive architecture the concept of belief, and in modeling, there is a statistical approach called Bayesian networks, where you can create a series of beliefs. So the action, which is the choice that the child makes about the name of the object or about the location left boxes versus basket for your location of this sticker of the object. The decision here depends on the belief that you create about the reliable person, the unreliable person, you integrate them and you decide. So we have created a series of belief networks which adjust their probabilities, their weights, through this approach, which is observe, create a theory, meaning create your statistical probabilities, linking these nodes, then look at the evidence. If the evidence is okay, you increase it. If not, you decrease it. And you can use different methods for this type of belief networks. So quite a different approach. There is a component of learning because the theory of mind component must be created through experience, and this probability are adjusted through your experience. So interacting with a 100% reliable teacher, with a 50% reliable teacher, with a 0% reliable teacher will create a different theory of mind. And in this stage, we have a theory of mind for the unreliable, a theory of mind for the reliable. You have your belief, you have the belief for the reliable and unreliable, you integrate, and then you make your choice. And what we did then, we integrated, remember, we want to model the concept of learning to speak by having these two reliable and unreliable teachers. Therefore, we took the ERA architecture. This is a visualization of these cone maps and the Hebbian associations. We linked this in a reinforcement learning type approach to the other concept of belief networks. And we were able to create a systematic replication of the experiments by Koenig and Harris, devising the experiments in 4 stages, which I'm going to describe in a moment. The first stage, you need to create an experience that the child has about some names of objects. So the gray person is the neutral person. Here, you will see red and blue shirts to distinguish the reliable and unreliable. So you teach the object a series of words in a systematic way. So the robot knows that some objects have a ground truth of being, this is a ball, this is a cup, this is, I don't know, a horse. So if I knew person with a red shirt, come and call this is a horse, but you're looking what you know it's a ball, this is an indication that the person is unreliable. Instead, if the new person, blue shirt, says this is a ball, you know it is or she is being reliable. So first stage, create a ground truth for the robot to be able to compare the reliability of the speakers. And now you get familiarized with the two informants, the two speakers. The blue t-shirt, always reliable, same labels, the other one, wrong labels. Then third stage, you ask the person, you ask the robot to tell you which one is the reliable and unreliable person. By using the color, of course, looking at your history of the changes of your belief network to know, to have the two different theory of minds. And then in the final test, if the reliable person gives a name to the object, the same object, but the unreliable person is given a different label. So this is called Loma, this is called Maido. If you ask the robot, what's the name of this object? You would expect, if I trust the reliable, I'm going to call this Loma, right? Because I know that you were a reliable. The neutral person will be given the label corresponding to the reliable experience. Long story, let's look at the video. So 1 minute when we combine together this short segment of the 4 stages. This work has been done by Massimiliano Patacchiola, one of my PhD students. Something happened to the video, to the audio. The audio is there. Oh, I can comment this. Remember, first phase, you give the correct names. Then if you see the red shirt, blue shirt, she will say, this is a cup. Now you are asking the child about this person. I'm sorry about the audio. I don't know what happened to this. No, this is the final stage. She will say this is a llama. It knows she is reliable. The unreliable would have called this something different. And then if the neutral person shows the object, you would expect the robot to do this. Sorry for the audio. And remember, in our approach, we want to map the procedure of one experiment with the procedure in the robot experiment. So here we compare for the robot data, for the child data, the different stages of development. We model the maturity of the theory of mind in the way we update the weights when you are experiencing the 2 types of teachers. And you see the nice results, statistically speaking, that match. This is just a snapshot. There is a paper already published on the simulated version of a robot. We now actually, we have just submitted a paper on the actual robot implementation of this reinforcement learning approach, which is used to have reliable and unreliable speakers to allow them to create a theory in mind. So this example, the video showed how can a robot create a theory of mind that the human person and autonomously decide whom to trust and whom not to trust. I said that there are 2 sides of a coin. The other side of the coin is, if I'm the person, you give me this perfect, beautiful, autonomous car, am I going to switch the autonomous system on, yes or not, or when I do it? I leave a robot with my parents to help and support the lonely parents. How and when are my parents going, or me as a child, going to switch this system on and off? To do this, we need to understand how people react to features of robots. So in parallel to the studies on the cognitive architecture of trust, my other student, Deborah Zanatto, has been looking, she's a psychologist, at experiments on perception of trust, factors affecting perception of trust, social gaze, speech. We are doing work on posh English accent versus local regional accents with my colleague Jeremy Morse. Anthropomorphic priming. If you show I don't think I have time to show this, but if you show first a full humanoid robot, like a now or an iCub, and then you do the experiment with a non-humanoid robot, we call this Johnify. It's a German robot modified. It's called Cytos G5. Okay, so a full humanoid versus a half-cooked humanoid. Same for the Baxter, right? The Baxter is almost a humanoid. What you get is a priming effect. You have primed the person to expect so much human-like behavior from a humanoid that when you show the non-humanoid, you start to distrust the system, not to accept the system. 2 main approaches, methodological approaches. One is the price judgment game. The robot is selling the person food objects from a supermarket, real object. The robot proposes 2 prices. You choose one. Half of the time, the person doesn't know. The robot will accept your choice. Half of the time, the robot will say, no, I think you are wrong. I'm going to sell this for a different price. Or this is the right price, the one that you didn't suggest. We count how many times the participants change their mind, and this is a measure of trust. A continuous measure of trust is more of an investment game. You play a game where you invest money. The amount of money indicates how much you trust the person or not. These are standard procedures used in the field. And just to give you an idea of how it works, you look at the video. This is funded by the US Air Force. So one of the phenomena we analyzed was the non-social condition. So the non-social, the robot fixates one point in space without really engaging in social gaze. So he suggests 2 prices, she chooses one.
Do you want to change your choice?
Yes.
So you count how often you change your mind in the 50% cases. Social condition, look at the robot head and gaze movement.
This is flour. It is used for baking, and it could cost 50 pence or 1 pound and 30 pence. 0.5 or 1.
So the robot looks at the object when he talks about the object, looks at the person when he expects the person to make a
I
choice.
do not agree. Do you want to change your choice?
Yes.
Okay, so we use here, it's a two-factor experiment. One, the social, non-social component. The other one is the type of robot, which is humanoid versus non-humanoid. So if you first, in one experiment, you show, the results are here. The video was, we did 4 robot platforms. So the video was iCub. Here we are showing the Baxter or the Now. We consider the Now full humanoid. The Baxter is less humanoid or not humanoid in this context. So if you do this, if you show first each of the robot, if the robot is a humanoid, you see that in the social condition you trust the robot. In the non-social condition, where the robot doesn't look at you when it talks about these prices, you just don't trust the robot. Instead, if you look at the Baxter, it doesn't really matter almost. Statistically speaking, there is no difference. But look at the effect that you have here. When you have a Now, this is a Now which has been primed by Baxter. So you first show the Baxter and then you the Now. Do you have an increase here in trust? But here you see that the humanoid robot is creating such an expectation. You first show the Now, you have such an expectation that robots are human-like. They also perform social behavior human-like. That when you then show another robot, sorry, the labels are wrong here. When you show a Baxter here, you suddenly don't trust this robot anymore. My expectations were so big that now you don't look like a humanoid robot, so I don't care what you say, I don't trust. Social, non-social, for me, you are out of the category of a social robot. This is just some of the experiments. There are papers at HRI and now a paper submitted to humanoids that looks at this HRI experiment. But the two of them, the two approaches of this new project called Thrive, try, as I mentioned at the beginning, to combine the two sides of the coin. You want to build robots which are efficient, can be trusted, but then if you have a full autonomous robot, you want to be able to control or have a cognitive architecture of the trust in the robot. And I think the time should be okay because I have the final slide to summarize some of my points, and then I can answer questions if you have any. So let's try to summarize, putting the things together, what matters, what are the take-home messages. If I meet some of you in another conference in a year's time, I hope you will remember some of these keywords, if not, of course, the full content of the talk. So let's look at what has been achieved before we look at what are the open challenges which require more research. So if you look at developmental approaches, developmental robotics approaches to social interaction and communication, one important lesson learned is that embodiment, active exploitation of your body in the case of numbers learning, for example. Active use of your body in the case of the MODI experiment. This is essential for you, child, of you, robot, to increase your cognitive capability or to speed up your cognitive development. If you point at the object, or better, if you touch the object, you are going to learn to count faster. This is what has been demonstrated in children. This is what we want to replicate in our robots. If you remember the video on cumulative learning, we want to achieve systems that learn and add knowledge. And you saw a nice demonstration that this is possible. But at the same time, you saw a contradiction of this principle. Because when I started to experiment with numbers, I changed the architecture. I didn't talk much about the neural architecture for number learning, but I did change the architecture. So we don't use the ERA, epigenetic robotics architecture for numbers, which in a vision of developmental phenomena, cumulative learning should really be addressed. It should be accumulation, incremental modularization of our cognitive architecture. I didn't really have time to do this in my presentation, but if you look at one of our papers in 2015 with Linda Smith, not only we replicate the data from her initial experiments, but we actually made predictions on babies' behavior by experimenting with variety of conditions in our robots. In particular, instead of manipulating what they did, which is only left and right, one dimension, two conditions, we also manipulated the vertical dimension. So the robot can do left and right, or can do sitting and standing. In reality, we just move the table. So you need your torso when the table is lower, versus the table is higher, you move your torso in a different position. So this movement, remember, in a Conan representation of this continuity of categorical representation of your posture, allowed our iCub to actually perform two contradictory tasks, two interference tasks be learned at the same time. So you remember the switch task. You switch the position of the object. If when I switch the position of the object, left and right, I also switch the vertical position, this is going to allow the robot to learn to name the two objects for two different tasks. This was our prediction in our robot experiments. And what they did, they carried out new child experiments in Indiana, and they demonstrated that even human children are actually able to exploit this other dimension, in addition to left and right, to avoid interference tasks when you're teaching two contradictory tasks in the same strategy, but of course you are using another dimension of postural change. So, and this is quite a nice contribution that we roboticists give back in some way to the colleagues from psychology and neuroscience working with us. And of course, this is quite new stuff. We are trying to extend this, unfortunately, with a very different cognitive architecture, but we need to represent more complex social relationships here, reliable, unreliable, and so on. We look at trust. Of course, to be able to do trust, you need to have an implementation of a belief network or some architecture which represents the history of interaction. If you're always reliable, partially reliable, never reliable, this will create different expectations. And this has been achieved with a certain level of complexity that goes from toy experiment. If you notice the robotic behavior of the iCub when it does the pointing, this was done in simulation, that's why the robot behavior is quite rigid, versus the other continuum, where you have Tony interact with the robot, naming object, the robot looking at Tony's hands movement and so on to interact. So that's the achievement. Let's look at things that instead are still important directions, or one of the key directions in which we are working at least. I mentioned the open-ended, so we want to really have open-ended, larger lexicons, and we are doing some work on a system called Annabelle that learns now hundreds of words. Of course, the problem is how you link the grounding with these more complex systems. We have another European Marie Curie project called DCOM, led by Kenny Coventry, a psychologist, that looks at nonverbal communication. The active gestures are pointing gestures, demonstrative gestures, this, that, and so on. So we are trying to increase social communication skills from pure speech to speech and nonverbal communication. I didn't talk about this much, but one line of research is brain modeling, more realistic brain modeling. I mentioned the work by Pulver-Muller, and we actually had a UK-funded project with Friedman where we looked at the more realistic implementation in neuromorphic systems called Spinnaker, which model the activity of individual spiking networks in the brain, implementing this neuromorphic system, controlling the iCub behavior for attention problems, but also for simple language learning tasks. And why do we do this? At least those of us working in technical type departments or institutions or faculties, we want not only to just study and understand human cognition and artificial cognition, but we want to exploit this knowledge to build better systems. So one area of research is social robots for the elderly. This is what I do in some of my projects. My colleague Tony Belpame focuses more on tutors, robots that teach children foreign language and so on, plus there are applications, for example, in healthcare with children with disability and so on. And with this, I conclude by reminding you that you are now students. You are here, but most of the time you will be in your office. Your supervisor will be traveling around. What they are doing, I'm traveling around to present the work that the students have done. So most of the videos all the videos that you saw there, the research has been implemented by current PhD students, former PhD students, now some of them professors in UK international universities. And of course, this wouldn't be possible without the help of our funders, which allow us to hire the student and to pay for our traveling, I guess. And with this, I can conclude, and I think we have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.